The briefing room at the Joint Special Operations Training Center in Coronado, California smelled like old coffee, floor wax, and the particular brand of tension that gathers whenever people who consider themselves exceptional are forced to share a space with people they have not yet evaluated. It was 7:45 in the morning, and the room held 14 people, 12 of them Navy SEALs, one liaison officer from the Army's Special Forces community, and one woman who had arrived 2 minutes before the scheduled start time, set her bag on the table without ceremony, and begun reviewing a set of laminated cards that nobody near her could quite read. Her name was Captain Reyes, first name Diana. She was 34 years old, stood 5 feet 6 inches, and had the kind of build that was easy to underestimate at a distance and harder to underestimate up close. Not because she was physically imposing in the way that the men around her were physically imposing, but because she moved with the quality of efficiency that experienced operators recognized and inexperienced ones missed entirely. Every movement was purposeful. Nothing was wasted. She set her bag down once. She moved her chair once. She adjusted the laminated cards once. After that, she was still. Not the stillness of someone waiting, but the stillness of someone who had already decided what she needed to do next and was simply allowing the room to catch up. The SEALs did not know much about her yet. What they had been told in the brief administrative communication that preceded this joint training exercise was that a Marine Corps combat instructor would be co-facilitating the close quarters battle scenarios scheduled for the following 3 days. Most of them had processed this information and filed it in a mental category labeled logistical detail, which was where they put information that did not require immediate operational attention. A Marine instructor, fine. The scenarios would proceed the way joint training scenarios usually proceeded. Useful in parts, occasionally repetitive, managed by someone who knew their doctrine well enough to run the day. None of them had used the word she. The communication had not specified, and none of them had thought to ask. The team leader, a chief petty officer named Hargrove, was the first to actually look at Reyes with full attention. Hargrove was 41 years old and had been a SEAL for 16 years, which meant he had spent 16 years developing, among other things, a rapid and largely accurate assessment function for the people who entered his operational environment. He looked at Reyes for approximately 4 seconds and then looked away, which in his processing style meant he had formed a preliminary assessment and would continue refining it as information accumulated. The preliminary assessment was unknown quantity. This was not, for Hargrove, a negative assessment. Unknown quantities were more interesting than known ones. He had been bored lately, in a way that experienced operators sometimes get bored. Not for lack of work, but for lack of surprise. Most of the people he encountered in professional settings were variations on types he had encountered before. This woman was not immediately a variation on a type he recognized, and that was worth noting. 2 of the younger SEALs in the room had a different reaction. They were both in their late 20s, both recently certified after completing their training pipelines with results that had made them confident in a way that had not yet been tested enough to become wisdom. One of them, whose name was Kowalski, leaned toward the other and said something in a voice calibrated to be audible within a small radius. The other one, Morales, responded with a short sound that was technically not a laugh, but communicated the same information. The something that Kowalski said was not particularly original. It was the version of skepticism that people produce when they encounter a credential they consider mismatched with an appearance. The substance of it was, "She's going to teach us close quarters battle." Reyes heard it. She did not respond to it, did not look up from her laminated cards, did not adjust her posture or her expression. She continued reviewing whatever was on those cards with the same quiet focus she had maintained since entering the room. The facilitating officer from the training center, a lieutenant commander named Forsyth, called the room to order at exactly 0800. He did the introductions with the efficient neutrality of someone who has introduced people to rooms they were uncertain about many times before. He described the training objectives. He described the schedule. He introduced Reyes with her rank, her name, and her institutional affiliation: Marine Corps combat instructor. currently serving with the Marine Corps' Warfighting Laboratory, 8 years of operational experience, including 2 combat deployments, qualified instructor in advanced urban warfare, breaching operations, and close quarters battle decision making. The room received this information with the particular quality of attention that professionals use when they are listening to credentials they are not yet sure they believe. Then Forsyth said something that shifted the atmospheric pressure of the room in a small but measurable way. He said that Captain Reyes had also, in her previous assignment, served as an opposing force specialist, meaning she had spent 18 months, specifically, studying how to defeat SEAL tactics in simulated scenarios. The quiet in the room after that sentence was different from the quiet before it. Reyes set her laminated cards on the table and looked up for the first time since the introduction began. "I reviewed the scenario packages for the next 3 days," she said. Her voice was level and carried clearly without being loud. "I have some adjustments I'd like to discuss before we go to the range." Hargrove, in the second row, said, "What kind of adjustments?" "The entry sequencing on Scenario 2, she said. "The current package has the breach team moving to the secondary breach point after initial entry. In the environment we're working in, that sequence creates a window I'd like to walk through." "Why?" Hargrove looked at her. "What kind of window?" "A 6 to 8 second exposure window on the eastern approach," she said, "that an adaptive defender could exploit twice before the team reaches consolidation." She paused. "I found it when I ran the scenario from the defender's position last week." There was a short silence. "You ran it from the defender's side?" Morales said from the back of the room. "Yes," Reyes said simply. "By yourself?" "With 2 other instructors playing the breach team," she said. "We ran it 7 times. The window was present in 6 of the 7 runs." Kowalski, beside Morales, had stopped leaning. He was sitting straight now, with his arms off the table, which was the body language of someone who has received information that has changed the shape of the room for him. Hargrove was looking at Reyes with an expression that had moved considerably past preliminary assessment. He was doing the thing he did when an unknown quantity began resolving. Rapid recalibration. The adjustment of expectations against incoming data. "Show me on the diagram," he said. Reyes turned to the whiteboard behind her. She had, apparently, already anticipated this request. Because there was a diagram there, a floor plan of the scenario building, printed and posted before anyone else had arrived, and she moved to it with the same unhurried efficiency she applied to everything else, picked up a marker, and began to show him exactly where the window was. The room watched. 14 minutes later, the diagram had 6 annotations. 3 of the SEALs were standing near the whiteboard asking questions, and the lieutenant commander from the training center was sitting in the back with a quiet expression that might have been called professional satisfaction. Kowalski, in his chair, was looking at the diagram with an expression that was not quite what his face had held 30 minutes before. The amusement was gone. In its place was something that required more careful handling, the specific discomfort of a person who has underestimated someone and is now in the process of recalibrating not just their assessment of that person, but their assessment of their own assessment. This was the part nobody prepared you for. Not the combat scenarios, not the physical requirements, not the tactical doctrine. The part where you discovered that competence did not check the boxes you expected it to check, and that your boxes were smaller than you thought. Reyes put the marker down. "Any questions before we go to the range?" she said. The room was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet than it had been at 0800. It was the quiet of a room full of people who were paying attention. Hargrove looked at her, then he looked at Forsyth, then he looked back at Reyes. "Let's go," he said. They went, and what happened on that range over the following 3 days would become one of those stories that circulates in particular professional circles for a long time, told at first with the specific texture of things that surprised people, and later, with the texture of things that made sense in retrospect. But to understand what happened on the range, it was necessary to understand where Captain Diana Reyes had come from, and what she had become before she walked into that briefing room with her laminated cards and her quiet, efficient stillness. And how? The road that led her to that whiteboard was nothing like the road anyone in that room would have predicted for her. Diana Reyes grew up in a house on the eastern edge of El Paso, Texas, where the desert started in the backyard and the border was close enough that the sounds of two countries drifted across the air on hot evenings. The house was small and loud, with the particular loudness of a family that communicated in high volume, not out of anger but out of habit. 4 siblings, 2 parents, a grandmother who had opinions about everything and the energy to express all of them simultaneously. It was a house that did not have quiet corners. And Diana, who was the second youngest and the only girl, learned very early that if she wanted space to think, she had to build it herself. She built it in movement. By the time she was 9, she had developed a habit of running in the early morning, before the household was fully awake, before the heat had settled into the streets. She ran without a set route and without a timer, just moving through the grid of residential blocks until her legs told her to stop, and then turning around and coming back. There was no athletic purpose to it, yet it was simply the shape that her need for thinking space took when no other shape was available. Her father, a man named Eduardo Reyes, who worked maintenance at the Air Force Base outside of town, noticed the habit and said nothing about it for several weeks. Then one morning, he appeared at the kitchen door at 5:30, as she was lacing her shoes, poured himself a coffee, and said, "If you are going to run, run with a purpose. Don't just move to move. Pick a destination, reach it, assess it, and choose the next one." Diana was 9 years old and did not fully understand what he meant. But she filed the instruction away and began doing something approximating it, choosing a landmark before she left the house, reaching it, pausing, choosing another. Over time, the habit of setting a destination before moving became so deeply embedded in how she approached physical effort that she could not separate it from the movement itself. She did not know, at 9, that this was essentially military thinking. She did not know that the discipline of assessment decision movement, applied consistently and under increasing pressure, was the foundational cognitive structure of operational planning. She was just a girl running through El Paso in the dark. But her father did know. Eduardo Reyes had served 8 years in the army before a knee injury ended his service, and he understood that the most important thing he could give his children was not money or connections or a particular kind of opportunity. It was a way of organizing their relationship to difficulty. Run with a purpose. Pick a destination. Reach it. Assess it. Choose the next one. Diana absorbed this so completely that she stopped being able to find the seam between the lesson and herself. She was 16 when she told her father she wanted to join the Marines. Not the Army, the Marines. She had researched the difference with the seriousness she applied to everything she decided to pursue, and she had concluded that the Marine Corps' particular emphasis on individual toughness and small unit cohesion matched something in her that she could not name, but recognized clearly. Her father looked at her for a long time. Then he said, "The Marines will be harder for you than for your brothers, if your brothers were going. Not because you are less capable, because the institution has not yet fully decided how to hold people like you. You will have to help it decide, and that will cost you energy that your male counterparts will not spend." Diana said she understood. He said, "I don't think you do yet, but you will." He was right on both counts. She graduated high school a semester early, spent the intervening months in a self-designed physical preparation program that she built from research and adjustment, and enlisted at 17 with a waiver that her recruiter had to work for. Boot camp at Parris Island was the first time she had been in an environment where her gender was not incidental to the experience, but structural to it, where the institution's design and her presence in it were in a state of ongoing negotiation that nobody had fully resolved. She navigated it the way she had learned to navigate difficulty, with a purpose, one destination at a time. What distinguished Reyes from the beginning was not just physical capability. The Marine Corps produced